Okay, so I'm broadcasting. There are about 20 people who will be waiting. We'll record it and then we'll upload it and edit it. So the maximum number of people can actually watch it. Let's see here. All
Will
right,
be.
so I believe we're on live here. Yeah. Okay, we're on live on Twitter. And um, and we're also, I believe, live on YouTube. Let me check that. Yes. Yeah, perfect. Okay, so we'll give it a minute, let people join in. There's hundreds of people coming around here. Let's see if they will see what questions they will come up with as well. We see a lot of things trending from the campus of Harvard, which is not always a good thing, right, Avi?
Well,
When you're trending on Twitter.
like anything that humanity does these days, it can be better.
Mm-hmm. So we got 100+ people already. We'll give it another minute, let people trickle in. I'm also on LinkedIn. And Avi is so productive because he does not waste his time on what is known in Yiddish as Narishkeit, stuff for the ego. But he is extremely prolific and needs basically no introduction. I will give him one in just a minute. Let's see if it's live. It should be on LinkedIn. Join here. Maybe this will work. Maybe it won't. Yep. Oh, it's wow. Okay, so we've got this on multi different streams, interdisciplinary streams. So first off, I want to welcome you, and it's been about 3 months since we spoke. We spoke last for your wonderful second book, Interstellar, and a lot has happened since that time, and I cannot ignore kind of the mastodon trampling through the room and not ask you as someone who was born in Israel, who's raised on farm in Israel, who is one of the most preeminent scientists in the world, but also a very proud Jew, and as am I. And I don't make any apologies for that. I was in Israel a mere 2 weeks before the October 7th Hamas terrorist attacks. I was in Tel Aviv. I was in southern Israel. I was in Jerusalem. And I was very close because it was Rosh Hashanah, Avi. I actually got to be very close with a lot of Palestinians, Arabs, because they were the ones working while Jews were enjoying their holiday. So I actually had many meals with Palestinians, shared many rides with them on public and private transport, and had no inkling of what would happen. And the insight that I think we need to start with before we turn to Harvard, and then eventually to the subject that I originally invited you to speak about, which is your area of expertise, which is this interstellar meteorite, which has received some pushback from the community, as happens. Some of it fair, some of it possibly not fair. We'll talk about that. So 3 things on the agenda today. First of all, Avi, I need to give you a chance to just share your thoughts as a man of science, as a man of conscience, and as a Jew. How have you been affected by the events of October 7th?
Well, let me first clarify, this is not a war between the Palestinians and Israel. It's a war between the Hamas and Israel. And there is a clear distinction because given the charter of the Hamas, there cannot be peace. There cannot be a two-state solution. The Hamas calls for the removal of Israel, for killing all citizens of Israel. There is no room for compromise. And therefore, anyone that sides with a terrorist organization which basically aims to annihilate the state of Israel, kill all the Jews rather than reach a compromise, is basically advocating violence. And that has nothing to do with political opinion. I want to clarify that. My wife is a peace-seeking Israeli, and she was always on the left advocating for finding a resolution to the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. But what happened on October 7th was rape of women, killing of babies, one of whom, I will not get into the details. There is actually a film about it, but it was the most violent act of barbarism against humanity, basically killing people that have nothing to do with a military conflict. These are civilians at their homes. And in a way, it's sort of like the reckoning after 9/11, we should all condemn such an act. Now, then you ask yourself, how is it possible that 25 student organizations at Harvard University would cheer up and say that the victims deserved it? Irrespective of political views, nobody should celebrate killing of innocent civilians for any political purpose. And so that is a distortion of the moral compass. And you ask yourself, how did we get there? Well, it's obviously a result of social media, where that polarizes society, but you can't just relate it to that. There is something wrong with academia. And yesterday, I was actually in Washington, D.C. I was jogging at 6 a.m. On the Arlington Bridge with a backdrop of a beautiful sunrise. And a few hours later, Harvard's president, along with two other university presidents, was testifying in Capitol Hill, where I met with other people. And she was asked, Claudine Gay was asked, whether calling for a genocide of Jews should be considered harassment, yes or no? And she said it depends on the context. And not only she, but the other two presidents. And to me, that is a terrible message, because there is no doubt that the genocide of any group of people should be condemned. She should have said no, but instead she said if it doesn't translate into action, then we have to deal with it on a case-by-case basis. And what does it mean, action? That Jews will be killed on campus? Only then would you consider it as a violation of the code of ethics? I mean, obviously, a lot of students feel unsafe, and classes are disrupted by demonstrators all the time right now at Harvard University. So obviously, you can advocate for freedom of speech, but there is a limit. If someone comes on campus and praises Hitler and calls for killing of Jews, obviously that is, that person crosses the line. There is a limit. A university is an educational institution, okay? And that means you need to educate people. What does it mean to educate people? It means that to tell them when they are wrong, not to allow them to say things that are harmful to other people. And obviously, this is all recognized in some context of gender diversity, ethnic diversity, but not in this case of the Jews. And you ask yourself, how is that possible after the Holocaust, where 6 million people were killed? I mean, don't we have those sensitivities? And the provost of Harvard, Alan Garber, was sitting just behind Claudine Gay when she gave this testimony. So I won't say that the dysfunctional leadership at Harvard is just a matter of people not understanding the Jewish history, because there are some Jews involved in allowing this to happen, like the provost of Harvard, like the head of the board of trustees, Pritzker, and something is simply wrong.
It shouldn't take a Jew, right? It shouldn't take a Jew. Look, the same people, those same provosts, the Pritzker family, they were justifiably outraged at the murder, the death of George Floyd. I remember 3 years ago or more. And we received on this campus, basically shut down campus. We shut down journals. We protested on behalf of the solidarity with African Americans on campuses. And that was swiftly and roundly condemned. And we had teach-ins and so forth. I tweeted out today, thank God, basically, that UCSD isn't as prestigious as Harvard or MIT, because when you're at an institution like a Harvard, like a Yale, like MIT, like Penn, you have a long way down. When you are the president of that university, that Harvard, I hate to admit it, although we all know it's true. Harvard is the gold standard, okay? What happens at Harvard affects the rest of the world, not just higher education, not just the Ivy League. Just as what happens in California academically for students in schools dominates the rest of the nation because we have the biggest population. So we have the very, very bright spotlight that burns on campuses. Now,
But
here on my own campus,
yeah.
go ahead. Yeah.
No, I just wanted to add that, even in the context of freedom of speech, which was mentioned by the leadership of Harvard, Harvard ranks very low because there were
What?
professors who were fired for just suggesting, that women give birth, and that was considered inappropriate in the current intellectual climate. But on the other hand, calling for the destruction of Israel and genocide of Jews is not considered a deviation from what is acceptable. And if there is freedom of speech, the first group of people that should have it are tenured professors. That's the whole meaning of tenure. So how is it that there is this cancel culture to basically remove those who you do not agree with, including speakers, from the other side of the political spectrum? I think that has the consequence of polarizing society even further, because at an academic institution, you must be taught to listen, to have a dialogue with people that disagree with you. That is the fundamental ethics of academia, and that is being violated. I have this sense that it's just like 1984 of Orwell, where some people in academia are advocating for principles but are violating them by their own actions. So they are, on the one hand, virtue signaling as if they are in favor of diversity, but then anyone that disagrees with them on a particular subject is not allowed on campus. And so just like George Orwell mentioned the party line, which basically said war is peace and ignorance is strength. You are advocating for something and then violating it yourself. And I find that to be completely inappropriate, especially for intelligent people. I mean, you can imagine politicians doing that for political benefits, but within academia, it's just unacceptable, because we are educating the next generation of leaders, especially at Harvard. We have to show some moral compass when we direct them into their adulthood. So
Well,
I really am
forget who said
disappointed.
it, but
Yeah.
yeah, no, I forget who said it, but there's nothing that's so ludicrous that it can't be believed by the world's most intellectual individuals, of which universities are a part. Now, I think universities have a special duty, as you say, because everything in society is downstream from universities. In other words, every journalist went to a university, every politician went to a university, every tech worker, every professor went to a university. We have a huge amount of leverage on society. And since the 1970s and beyond, we've become obsessed with what's called critical thinking and basically destroying a lot of what the currency that academia built up over the past 100 years. And I think I feel like it is a sea change when I see on campus here at UC San Diego the ISIS flag being raised to intimidate senators before a student senate meeting, when I see people needing police escorts to leave a student senate meeting, Jewish students only, when I see
What about
medical workers.
the Bin Laden letter that was spread around the TikTok? You just think about it, where a lot of young people just argued that it now makes sense for what Bin Laden was saying. And that these are corrosive elements that could destroy our society. They could lead to violence. They could lead to a repetition of what history did so badly. I mean,
What do you think was going
yeah.
through? I mean, to the extent that you know her at all, I mean, I was disappointed. I mean, they all had a script. They all said essentially the same thing. President Gay, your president, had an opportunity because she wasn't president. She hasn't been president for that long, although she's obviously received a ton of ire, et cetera. But what do you think was going through the minds of the MIT president and the Penn president? Why can't they? Why is it so difficult? I mean, what forces would conspire? And at my graduate institution, Christina Paxton at Brown University, Ivy League as well, She refused to say that, prepared remarks in her speech. She was going to say that you should feel free to wear a kippah, a yarmulke, as well as a hijab, and she changed it because there were chants that she's, a part of genocide, taking, benefiting from it because they won't boycott, divest, and sanction. Now, by the way, would you be allowed? Let's say BDS were to pass, and would you be allowed? Because do you still have dual citizenship, or I
Yes,
know
I
that
do.
my colleagues would not, that are in Israel, they would be forbidden to come to campus. So I find this medieval. I find this like a throwback to the Dark Ages. You could talk about wanting to boycott companies, fine, but to sanction and to boycott individuals, that is an anti-intellectual
Right.
pursuit, in my opinion.
Also, I
What do you
think,
think was going through President Gay's mind? Yeah.
well, uh, you could see that the answers reflect a very careful dance around the legal issues, because if she were to admit that calling for genocide is inappropriate, then the next question would be, what do you do about it? And then if she
Right.
says, okay, since it's in conflict with the code of conduct within Harvard University, we have to discipline those students. She doesn't want to go that far. And moreover, she doesn't want to be sued legally because of inaction in past events. So I think she was advised by lawyers to say what she said. But that is very disappointing, because leadership is all about uh, crafting your own words in a sincere, authentic fashion. And actually following the principles that you advocate for. And what you find
Right.
here is a situation where universities are failing to show any moral compass. And I'm very disappointed, because that's not the environment that I was hoping for. And actually, if you think about it, before October 7th, a lot of people had this illusion that their friends on the left will fight for them if a situation like that rises. But instead, what you see is a situation where you could call it anti-Semitism. I mean, you basically some people don't really care about lives of Jews, and I find that amazing. Because some of them are actually Jews, and
Oh yeah.
these, yeah,
Many
and
are Jews.
so something is wrong. And by the way, it doesn't really just. I think it's in a way, it looks to me like craziness. Okay, like loss of sanity in the context of our moral compass, and we need to get back to the basic principles, which is to respect everyone. And I was at a dinner in New York City, hosted by Bill Ackman, and he actually is a very strong critic of Claudine Gay. But there were some Harvard
Definitely.
faculty there, and at any event, General Patreos was speaking at that dinner. He was talking about
Hmm.
the geopolitical future of the Middle East after the Israel-Hamas war. And again, I'm emphasizing this is really the Hamas war. It's not the Palestinians. Maybe
Yeah.
it will be there will be an opportunity to establish something more stable in the future after destroying the Hamas. But at any event, so he was giving his forecast, which sounded gloomy actually, and the curator of the Museum of Modern Art was there, and Paula Antonelli, and she summarized her vision in 3 words. She said, "Love the aliens." Now, what she meant is you should love those that are different than you. And for me, scientifically speaking, I actually am looking forward to meeting another civilization that is smarter than us, because perhaps it will inspire us to do better. It's just like
Mhm.
finding a smarter student in your class. And for other people, it's a threat, because you want to always believe that you are the most intelligent. But you see the situation right now, we are wasting a lot of resources, effort on military conflicts. $2 trillion a year, by the way. And if we were to direct it to space exploration, we could send a space probe, a CubeSat, towards every star in the Milky Way galaxy, billions of them, within this century. It's just a matter of priorities. And for some reason, and I always ask, there was 2 months ago, there was a presentation of a play that was written by a playwright, Josh Ravech, about my research, current research. So he wrote a play that he wants to feature off Broadway in New York City. And in the play, the main character, which is me, asks the question, why is childlike bullying more prevalent than childlike curiosity? That's really the underlying problem we have, that people prefer to hate each other rather than to work together
Mm.
towards a better future.
So let me ask you. We make contact, next week, and a super powerful alien species been lurking for a long time. We kind of downplay them because they appear as like dust. They're just kind of dust. They're floating, but they do a demonstration. They take out Ceres, the asteroid Ceres, just obliterate it, and they say if you don't do the following, to achieve peace in the Middle East, we're going to do this to the whole planet. Okay. Now you are that alien species. You are the dust, the Avak. And tell me, Avi, what would you do? How could you, one of the most brilliant people I know, how would you approach us a true two-state solution, which I assume you advocate for, as do I? How would you do it? You're the king of the
Well,
universe right now,
this
not
is
just
really
a Harvard professor.
Yeah, this is really trivial, actually, the solution.
Okay.
And by the way, I should mention that in Judaism, there is this concept of the messianic age, which will come, in the future. That's why we are asked to conduct mitzvahs, which is basically trying to fulfill a more ethical future. And the goal is to hasten, to bring the Messiah as early as possible, because we need peace. And when the Messiah arrives, there will be peace. A lot of Jews think that the Messiah might arrive from Brooklyn. I think that the Messiah will arrive from an exoplanet, okay, because it will give us a new perspective. Now, what would be the advice of this Messiah? Okay, I think it's very simple. You keep fighting, the Messiah will tell us, you keep fighting on a two-dimensional surface of a rock left over from the formation of the sun. How ridiculous can that be? There is a third dimension out there. It's called space, the third dimension. Just look up. Instead of looking down on each other, look up. And there is so much real estate out there that you can have not only a two-state solution, you can have an infinite number of states out there, almost, as long as you travel far enough. So this is really, we can't stay on Earth forever, because eventually the sun will burn up all the oceans, but we can start moving out of it. It's really a very limited point of view to think that we have to stay on this two-dimensional surface where the territory is limited. Let's imagine together a future on the moon, a future on Mars, and then moving out of the solar system. That would be a very simple solution. You just have to think bigger, okay? And instead of, it's, this joke about a man coming to a rabbi, okay? And I'm using this Jewish narrative here because we were discussing it before.
Yeah.
So a man comes to a rabbi and complains, says, at home, we really have no space and we just had a baby and it's really quite distressing. What is your advice? And the rabbi said, bring a goat into your home. And the man says, what? You're suggesting that I'll add more living beings? Then he brings the goat, and a week later comes back to the rabbi and says, it's even more terrible. And the rabbi said, now take the goat out. Once the goat, and then he says, don't you feel much better now? And so of course, it could have been worse than we are feeling right now in terms of the conflicts we have, but it's all because we are engaged in zero-sum game, where the resources are limited. And that's the way it was in the jungle when there was a bunch of bananas and only one person could use, let's say, consume them, and then we would fight on those resources. And so that's the way we think. But I think what science and technology offers us is an infinite sum game where everyone can benefit as long as we cooperate. The meaning of science is cooperation, and that's what I visited a week and a half ago. I was at CERN. I gave a public lecture there, and this institution was conceived by a theorist. As much as it is an experimental center,
Yeah.
That was Louis de Broglie, a theorist who won the Nobel Prize for his PhD. And he just conceived of a center of excellence for experimental physics that is international. And there are 23 member countries. And this is really the DNA of science, working together. And if we were to, you know, put science as a higher priority in society, perhaps we will do better.
Yeah, I hope that we will. So, speaking about aliens, and now moving to the subject of interstellar and extraterrestrial meteorites. And I remind you, if you would like a meteorite, you're guaranteed to get one if you simply visit and you happen to have a edu email address. Oops, I made myself disappear. If you go to briankeating.com, you will get your own meteorite. So please go there if you have a .edu email address. Avi, we've seen tremendous interest in your book, and that's been phenomenal. And I wonder what the reaction to the book has been since we last spoke back in, I guess it was September, late August. And I want to get your take on just the popular reaction to your second book, after coming as it did on the heels of your phenomenal runaway smash hit bestseller, Extraterrestrial. So tell us, please, Avi, how has been the reaction both in critical circles and in the consumer circles? And then we'll move on to some matters that are pressing because they involve a critique, as is natural in science to get a critique. Maybe not the way it was done, but we'll get into that. So please tell us, Avi, how
Right.
has been the reaction to the new book, which I
Okay,
have
well,
here somewhere?
the first book, Extraterrestrial, became a bestseller in many countries, 28 editions, 25 languages. And that attracted a lot of attention. I had of the order of actually more than 3,000 interviews as a result of that. Just over the past couple of months, there were 3 profiles, one in the New York Times Magazine, another one in the Telegraph, and the last one was in The Guardian. And there is a lot of attention. There is a documentary being prepared about my research by Netflix, and they have been filming for more than a year. And in fact, they were following me when I went to the Swiss Alps last week, and they carried the camera all the way up, and that was quite tedious for them. And then they went with me to Washington, D.C. as well, just yesterday. So they keep following me. There are lots of interesting things happening, and you would see them hopefully when the documentary comes out, hopefully in 2025. Lots of things. Then, as I mentioned, there is a play that was presented at my home about the research. It includes a song that was composed by Alan Bergman, who won many awards and wrote Yentl for Barbara Streisand. And then, in addition, there is a sculpture being made inspired by my research by an artist in Spain. And so lots of things are happening. It very often happens that I go places and someone comes to me and asks for a selfie, which is something I'm not used to. It happened even on Richard Branson's Necker Island when I was there as the entertainer of a group of 40 people with a net worth, each of them a net worth above $400 million. And one of them came to me and said,
So
"Can
you
I
were
have
on
a
the high
selfie?"
side of that. You were on the higher side of
Oh,
that. You
I'm
brought the
at
average
zero.
up. You brought it up a
I,
little bit.
no, I'm at zero in that scale. But one of them came and said, "Can I have a video selfie with you? And I'll send it to my boss." And he never replies, but let's see what happens. And within minutes, the boss replied and said, "You know, I can't believe that you are with Avi Loeb on this island. I follow his work all the time." And, I went to buy an Apple Watch at the store just after a few minutes. That was the first time I went after the pandemic. And someone came to me and said, "Are you Avi Loeb?" And so anyway, people do recognize, and it had impact on, and that's part of what the mission that I have, aside from practicing science, which I should say is extremely important. You have to practice science in order to know what to advocate. There are many science popularizers who do not practice science, and they are just like commentators looking at a soccer match and telling the players how to pass the ball. Okay, and how dare they if they are not playing soccer? So my point is that aside from practicing science, I enjoy communicating to the public because it inspires young people how exciting science could be, and it shows that science should be driven by evidence. And we can talk more about it. But this was a result of the first book, Extraterrestrial. My new book, Interstellar, came just a few months ago. And just to mention two tidbits from it, one I call the Hawking limit. And that is, Stephen Hawking was at my home back in 2016 for Passover dinner, and he could hardly move a muscle.
Yeah,
He could only move his eyebrows, but nevertheless, he had a machine that could translate that into words, and you could still see the human side of Stephen Hawking. At one of the events, he said, "I'm bored. Could we have? Could we go to the hotel bar and have some fun?" And he had an affair with his caretaker, some
mm,
years before that. So
that's
he
right.
was definitely human, but he couldn't really use at will his physical body. So that's the limit that artificial intelligence works at right now. Without robots, ChatGPT or anything more futuristic could potentially imitate mental states of humans. And so I call that the Hawking limit, where it's not associated with any physical motion, but actually just the mental states are human like. Okay, so that's an interesting uh, limit where AI systems will be quite important in society, because you can develop a relationship with them. They would appear just like a human except for the physical aspect. And of course, for interstellar travel, that's extremely important for any probe to have a brain, an artificial brain, so that the probe can decide for itself how to respond to circumstances, because the time it takes signals to travel to the sender is simply too long. Even for light, it takes thousands of years across the Milky Way galaxy. So that AI brain is really essential for interstellar travel. The other thing I mentioned in the book is classifying civilizations. And to me, a mark of intelligence is the ability to recreate your environment. So we are polluting our planet. We are sort of like these tourists that arrive at a national park and throw bottles everywhere. Like, we don't care so much about our environment as of now. Maybe now we will start. But the most intelligent way is to actually recreate the environment. So, for example, create life in the laboratory. And we are, in principle, a scientific civilization can do that. Or even better, create a baby universe if you understand how to use quantum gravity in the lab. And it's possible that the Big Bang came to exist that way. But uh, that's one benefit of finding the most intelligent civilization in the Milky Way, because we can learn if these things are possible. We can ask them questions. My first question would be, what was there before the Big Bang? Okay, that would be because it will teach us about quantum gravity, it will teach us about our cosmic roots. If they know the answer, that would be wonderful. The second question is, where is the nearest interstellar bar where extraterrestrials come together and have conversations? You know, because Steven Weinberg, the Nobel laureate, in his book The First 3 Minutes, he argued at the end that the more the universe is comprehensible, the more pointless it looks. And the reason I think it looked pointless to Steven Weinberg is because he focused on elementary particles, on things that have no life to them. And we know from our personal experience that finding a partner gives a meaning to your existence. So if we ever find a partner out there on an exoplanet or in between stars, it could give a meaning to our existence. The universe will not appear to be pointless anymore. And we could learn from that partner. And this is my romantic version or reason to find the partner. I do think that it will help us.
Yeah, I think the existential loneliness and the aspects of of feeling like we lack free will, and also the ultimate questions. This is what makes us humans. And I want to point out to my to my viewers, and actually to my channel members at YouTube, you can watch a video. I made a video about you, Avi, not about your research, but your work with Vygotsky, I believe it was, on falsifying inflation using the cosmic graviton background. That comes out tomorrow morning, unless you are a channel member, which I love and appreciate. We've got dozens and dozens of them. Then you can watch it basically now. So
That's
yeah, stay
great,
tuned for that,
Brian.
Avi. I'll let you know when
Thank
that
you
goes
so
in.
much. I should tell you that I have a follow-up paper I'm working on right now, and so you have a little scoop here
Oh,
that
wow.
if I mean, we tend to assume that the universe was always the same in all directions, that it was expanding the same rate, and that's called the isotropy, that the universe was always isotropic. But if you allow a small level of anisotropy, of the universe expanding in one direction a little faster than in the other direction, turns out that early on the difference was larger, actually, and we just found the solutions for that. And what happens is, along one axis, the short axis, you can actually get to a singularity before the other. So the other axis can actually expand at the time that the short axis collapses. They can bounce. And so you can get a graviton background with different properties than you expect in an isotropic universe. And that's the fun of doing science, that you never know what you might discover tomorrow. And actually, the reason I went to Washington, D.C. is because I had an insight about something that could be useful to people over there. But that's
Oh, wow.
completely unrelated. It's related to gravity, but not to anything we discussed so far.
All right. Well, great. We need to get into the meat of the subject matter today, which has to do with the claimed, I will call it the back reaction to the discovery of spherules of a likely extrasolar composition in the Pacific Ocean site of the CNEOS 2014 bolide. So, first of all, let's give a quick recap because I know you've got a limited amount of time. I want to be respectful. We have a lot to cover. Can you summarize the steps, if you will, that led you to believe that the bolide discovered and with samples collected from Papua New Guinea, that was likely to be of extrasolar origin?
Right. So this was the fireball from the object that was roughly the size of a watermelon. Was observed by US government satellites on January 8th, 2014, almost a decade ago. And for 5 years, nobody paid attention, but we calculated that the speed of this object was so high that it was unbound to the sun. So it came from interstellar space, and moreover, it was moving faster than 95% of the stars near the sun at 60 kilometers per second. So that gave us the inspiration to go out there to the Pacific Ocean and look for the materials of this object. So I led an expedition, and by the way, it took a year of very hard work to plan it, to receive the funding at $1.5 million, to have the best engineers and navigators involved, and eventually to design the machinery, the tools to collect any molten droplets from the surface of the object when it exploded as a result of its friction on air, when it produced this fireball, which carried about a few percent of the Hiroshima atomic bomb energy. And so we were looking for millimeter-sized particles, the size of a grain of sand, at the bottom of the ocean, which was roughly a mile deep at that location, about 60 miles from Papua New Guinea. And the region that the Department of Defense defined for the location of the fireball was about 7 miles large. So just think about it, searching across such a huge volume of water and looking for millimeter-sized particles. It sounds hopeless. A lot of people said you will not find anything. Nevertheless, we went there, and then we ended up finding those molten droplets, most of which are background particles that are not related to the meteor, but we found an enhancement along the meteor path. So we made the map and indeed found an excess of spherules. And moreover, in that region where the excess was, we found a composition of elements from the periodic table that is distinct, that was never reported in the literature. It has rare elements enhanced by factors of hundreds relative to the standard solar composition. And we had to give it a name because nobody in the literature described that before. And we called it Belau composition because beryllium, lanthanum, and uranium are enhanced. Uranium by a factor of almost 1,000 relative to the standard solar composition. Now you ask, okay, so what does it mean? We couldn't match it to rocks on Earth. We couldn't match it to rocks on Mars or on the moon or asteroids. And we argued this implies that it may be extrasolar in origin, completely independently of the evidence about the meteor speed being unbound. And the question then is, what is the origin of this object? And in fact, I wrote a scientific paper that was submitted for publication that suggests a natural origin that has to do with a magma ocean planet, a planet where the rock was molten. Actually, the Earth was in that state early on when it was bombarded by heavy collisions, and the moon was made out of one of these collisions. And just imagine another planet with molten rock, then some elements are sink to the core of the planet, which is usually iron, because they have affinity to iron, leaving behind other elements. And those elements left behind are in the crust of the planet, and those are the elements we found enhanced in the Belau composition. So the suggestion was maybe it originated from some exoplanet that had molten rock all across the volume of the planet. But then the question is, how do you kick it out of that planetary system at a speed that is faster than the speed of stars, the typical speed of stars? And we came up with a very interesting possibility that, the Earth, when the Earth, when it's close, well, we have the moon around it. So the moon raises tides in the oceans. Okay, we are all familiar with the tides. But if you were to replace the moon by the sun, just put the sun next to the Earth, obviously the tides would be stronger, but not strong enough to destroy the Earth by gravity, by the gravitational tide, because the density of the sun is lower than the density of rock. Okay, so it cannot destroy the Earth. If the Earth comes close to the sun, it will be swallowed once it enters the sun, but it will never be disrupted just by the force of gravity. However, the most common stars are 10 times lower in mass than the sun. They're called dwarf stars, and they are the most common, and they are 10 times smaller in size. So they end up being 100 times denser than the sun. And they can destroy an Earth-like planet that comes close to them. They will shred it into, we call it spaghettify the planet, make a spaghetti-like stream of rocks. And half of the mass of that planet will be ejected to interstellar space. We calculated the speed, and amazingly, it's 60 kilometers per second. So that could be an origin for this meteor, because you expect the highest velocity fragments to be kicked out at the highest speed from the crust, from the outer layer of that planet. Of course, there could be also an artificial origin. We don't know for sure that it's natural. You can imagine melting a computer screen or melting a semiconductor. And obviously, the abundance of rare elements will be quite different from that of common rocks. So to find out the origin, we need to find bigger pieces of the meteor, and we are now starting to plan the next expedition to find those. The machinery that we will use will be bigger and more expensive, but we are hoping to do that in 2024. And I'm always guided by evidence, and I always claim that it's a lot of hard work. We spent 2 weeks in the Pacific Ocean. I didn't sleep much during those 2 weeks because we had 26 runs where we lifted, a sled covered with magnets from the ocean floor after it attracted the magnetic particles, these spherules that we found, and we would scrape the magnets and put it back on the ocean floor. That was a lot of hard work. And the reason I bring this up is because a lot of the critics, first of all, they didn't do any hard work. They just express an opinion. They don't have access to the spherules. They just say, oh, well, maybe it's coal ash. That was the most recent argument. Maybe it's coal ash. Well, we checked. We have 60 elements, okay, from the periodic table that we analyzed. And I can tell you with confidence that it's not coal ash. The critics were looking at 3 elements out of the 60 and saying, oh, well, it looks not so far. But if you look at the 60, it's clearly not coal ash. We didn't find coal ash. We found real spherules from a meteor. And we can talk about why critics behave this way, which is really not professional. I mean, they attack on a personal level and so forth. But if I had to summarize it in one word, I would say it's jealousy.
Jealousy. So when I look at the paper, this is we should acknowledge again the mastodons in the room. Steve Desch, Alan Jackson. I'm happy to talk to them. When you and I hang up, I'm happy to talk to them anytime. They're always welcome, as long as they adhere to the rules of decorum and don't make ad hominem attacks. But they present a paper last month, I believe it was, which is called A Critique of Your Paper. I'm not going to read the whole title. But they go through 10 different claims that would all have to be true in order for your claim to withhold scrutiny. So I want to go through those really quickly, and you tell me just agree or disagree. So first one you agree with, I'm sure. The authors claim that the bolide was interstellar, moving too fast to have been bound in orbit around the sun when it struck the Earth. Agree, right?
Yeah. Yes.
You assert that the significant quantities of materials from the bolide would have survived atmospheric entry to be deposited on the seafloor, mostly as millimeter-sized ablation spheroids. You already said that. You claim to know the position of where these spherules were deposited to within an area 1 kilometer by 10 kilometers long.
Right.
The authors claim that a statistically significant excess of spherules, twice as many, were collected along the assumed path compared to control regions. Agree?
Right.
Yep. The authors measured iron isotope ratios in 11 spherules, including 3 Bellow spherules, and find them to lie along the terrestrial fragmentation line with errors of less than 1%, and show fractionations consistent with iron loss by vaporization during entry.
Right.
One of these spherules, S21, was found to be a compound sphere. 3 spherules stuck together while molten. The authors present back-of-the-envelope calculation to consist this is also consistent with fireball formation.
Right.
Authors measure the chemical enrichments of the Bellow and other elements and they assert that this composition is not found in any terrestrial sample.
Right.
Correct? And they claim Bellow is associated with the assumed path of the bolide, absent from regions far from the path, and therefore not associated with the fireball.
Correct.
The authors claim Bellow compositions would be uniquely consistent with formation in the magma ocean of a differentiated extrasolar planet. Now, I don't agree with this one, so be careful agreeing to this. Do you claim that they would be uniquely consistent with formation in a magma ocean, or wasn't that just one hypothesis?
That's one possibility, and that's why we need bigger pieces. I just wanted to give credit in terms of some of those statements. I've been working, part of our team includes Dr. Roald Tagel. He's the he's leading the work at the Bruker Corporation in Berlin, Germany. For us, he's using the best X-ray fluorescence device that the world has to offer. And then my colleague at Harvard, Professor Stein Jacobson, who has a group of postdocs working with him, and they're using one of the best mass spectrometers in the world for the analysis. So very often, the critics are referring just to me, but I wanted to explicitly say that we are talking about multiple people contributing. A lot of actually, there are tens of people on the paper, and they include also a collaboration with the University of Technology in Papua New Guinea. The head of the mining engineering department there, Dr. Jim Lam, is part of the analysis team. So there are lots of people
Mm-hmm.
involved. For some reason, these critics prefer to attack me. But
Mm.
anyway, they know about these groups. I can. Oh wait, I just need to mention
Now,
why. How do I know that they? Because Steve Desch wrote emails, personal emails, to Dr. Jim Lamb after I mentioned him in one of my essays, to Professor Stein Jacobson, trying to dissuade them from being part of this scientific research
hmm.
project. And I ask you, how is that ethical? How is that part of, how should I say, constructive scientific discourse? He was basically harassing my team members and telling them what you're doing is wrong, what you said is wrong, and you shouldn't do it. He was actively sending them emails. Now, they are senior people, but he also sent emails to junior people, student, my postdoc, and he is a senior faculty sending, intimidating students and postdocs. I just wanted to bring this up
Mm.
because this is completely inappropriate and very aggressive uh, uh, behavior that has nothing to do with science. It's the question whether you should intimidate young scholars who are part of a research team examining materials to which you have no access, following a project that took months to prepare, 2 weeks to collect the materials, and then months to
Yeah.
analyze the materials. This is a lot of work, and you attack them through direct emails to them, telling them not to do that. And I just wanted to bring this up because this is not in the public domain. But I
No,
can
no,
tell
yeah.
you, I have access to those emails, and I just decided not to mud wrestle because I will get dirty if I mud wrestle.
Right.
There is this approach of the eagle, that when there is a crow on the back of the eagle that pecks at its neck, the eagle doesn't fight the crow off. The eagle rises to greater heights where the oxygen level is low enough for the crow to drop off the back of the eagle. This is the approach that I'm trying to take. Basically, doing the science to the best of my ability. I may make mistakes, wrong inferences, but that's part of doing science.
Yeah,
Uh,
I,
and,
I
and,
agree
and my point,
100%.
no, and my point is, okay, you can disagree with me, but to attack young scholars personally through direct emails to them, threatening them and intimidating them, this is bullying. And this is unacceptable. But this is being done by those critics that you just mentioned.
Well, again, I don't like hearing that. I mean, we all live under this fantasy that scientists are somehow exalted individuals with access to special wisdom just because we have special knowledge. But in fact, nothing could be further from the truth. I always say that scientists are like children. They have these wonderful qualities of curiosity, of imagination,
Right.
of wanting to explore the world with wonder. But just like a child, they also are petty. They're jealous. They don't like other people's toys unless they get to have better toys. And in fact, they'll do nothing more to get pleasure sometimes than take down a rival. Now, I'm not calling Dr. Desch, Professor Desch, a child. I am inviting him. I'm throwing an invitation out there. If you would like to refute that, I follow him on Twitter. My DMs are open, Professor. So you're welcome, and you'll get a fair hearing. Avi, you can attest to that.
Yeah.
I've challenged you
No,
as a friend. I
but
still
here is
push
my
back.
point. The biggest damage that, forget about the spherules, that's not really important here, because what he's doing is sending a message that you dare not deviate from the beaten path that he defines as the dogma, because if you deviate, I will aggressively send you emails and tell you what I think and why you shouldn't do it. Okay? And that is very damaging, because the next time that the same postdoc or student works on dark matter or works on the beginning of the universe, those, after going through a traumatic experience of this type where a senior person behaves this way, those young people will not dare anymore. They would worry about their job prospects. And that is very damaging for the nature of innovation in science. That's what bothers me.
And it's
It's not so
surprising.
much the debate about these particular items.
On one of Steve Desch's most recent tweets, he posted a claim from somebody else's post, but he retweeted a claim about Jesus and how Jesus was claimed that your love for God was measured by your love of your neighbor and even your enemy. So I wonder if Professor Desch takes that advice to heart. Anyway, the invitation's open. I'll give him a fair hearing, and I will confront him with those as I've confronted you with things I disagreed with you about. And that's what friends do, and that's what science is all about. Anyway, getting back to his paper. So he says that none of these claims withstand scrutiny. Not any one of those 10 that I mentioned. The first thing he says is the bolide probably wasn't interstellar. He says probably, which is kind of strange that he's claiming that this claims that proves that your claims are incorrect. He says uncertainties in the velocities of objects in the, I'm going to just put this up on the screen because I know it's boring for people that are just listening, but let me put this up on the screen. There it is. Okay, you might not be able to see this, Avi, but you've probably seen it before, so I'm not going to. Okay, the bolide probably wasn't spherical. Uncertainties in the velocities are not reported, but these can be estimated separately, and they're large. There's a greater than 0.1% probability that it's not interstellar, which sounds small, but a catalog of 1,000 solar system bolides, the odds are high that one, okay, so that's just 0.1% converted to 1 in 1,000, appear to be interstellar velocities, and that appears to be that one, the one 2014. What do you have to say to that? That you miscalculated the uncertainties or overestimated your uncertainty?
It's okay. This is not me because the data was collected by the US Space Command. That's the organization that gets paid. Its annual budget is bigger than that of NASA. It's supposed to advise the US president about any ballistic missile that is heading from North Korea towards the US. And suppose they were wrong by a factor of 3, as Steve Desch and colleagues argue in their velocity measurement. They would advise the president of Mexico about a missile heading to Washington, D.C. I would be really worried writing a scientific paper or posting this on the archive claiming the government doesn't really know what they're doing for a budget of
but
tens.
Let me just strengthen his point.
So let
the
me
government
just
has been known to make mistakes, right?
Okay, sure. So that's exactly right. So I asked them in 2019 if they can confirm the uncertainty in the data. So they went back for 3 years analyzing the data and came back with a letter to NASA stating that they are confident at the 99.999%. After looking back at the data, that indeed this object was interstellar. So, I have no ability to access classified data, but they went out of their way. This is not their day job to help the frontiers of science. They are supposed to protect the nation against the national security threats. Nevertheless, they took the time to do that, to write a letter to NASA. And, all I can say is that when we analyze data in the scientific literature, we often have to trust the observers, the experimentalists that report about it. So they reported about it. They are a trustworthy organization that could have gone back to the data and looked at it. And it's not just the satellite data. And by the way, many of the critics say, oh, we are talking about ground-based data. No, it's not ground-based. It's also satellite data. And they combine multiple sensors. We don't have access to it because many of the sensors are classified. But they went back, checked it, and confirmed this is an interstellar object. That's my answer.
And it just seems like it could be approached from a Bayesian framework that we teach our, freshmen, right? I mean, what is the false positive rate? What is the false negative rate? And it's surprising me for an expert in calculations of this sort that he just says, quotes vague things like greater than 0.1%. Again, extend an invitation. If you know him out there, please send him my way. Okay, next one. He says that none of it would have survived entry if it were traveling at the speeds reported. And then at least 99.8% and probably greater than 6 nines would have been vaporized in the atmosphere, leaving insignificant quantities to be deposited. That seems like it could be addressed through a simulation. He just says it's great. Probably. I'm surprised again by the couching, the wiggle words here. Why does he say probably? Well, what do you react to that?
No, so the point is, first of all, the number of spherules that we recovered from the meteor path is fully consistent with a tiny fraction of the material surviving, with most of it being evaporated. And in fact, we wrote a scientific paper that Desch was, resisting and pushing back against, where we did a very detailed model with an undergraduate student that worked with me for a summer, and we posted it on the archive, where we calculate the size distribution of the spherules. What we found is similar in magnitude to what we forecasted based on a detailed physical model where we included the evaporation of material, the size distribution that you expect, solving the energy, momentum, friction equations for those fragments that may form based on all that is known in the scientific literature. So we actually did the hard work of a few months writing a scientific paper. And we couldn't do better than that, except go to the place and look for any spherules. And so we did the calculation. It's a small fraction of the total mass. And yes, what we found is consistent with that.
Okay, so the next one that he claims back is, or they claim, I should say, Jackson and Desch, the location of the bolide's path is far more uncertain than you realize, and it's almost certainly miscalculated. The CNEOS database reports 2 locations for the fireball, and they're 55 kilometers apart. If we pick one location, there are still large inherent uncertainties. Sound waves, trying to pinpoint it using sound waves 90 kilometers away. So that seems like it could have some validity. What is your response to that?
Right. So the Department of Defense provided a region that was 7 miles in size, and there were 3 flares in the fireball, separated by a tenth of a second. This object was moving at 40 kilometers per second. So over a tenth of a second, it would move about 4 kilometers, like a few miles. And if you have 3 flares, obviously the explosion was spread across a region that was, of the order of 7 miles or so. So that's why the localization could not have been better by the Department of Defense. But we also analyzed data from a seismometer in Manus Island, Papua New Guinea, just to figure out the distance of the explosion based on the fact that the sound waves arrive later than the light. We see that in lightnings, the sound from the explosion, the thunder that we hear arrives to us later, and we can tell the distance of the lightning based on the delay. And that's what we used in figuring out the path of the meteor. But more importantly, we had 26 runs, 26 back and forth scans of the region, and we tried to spread it wide enough so that we were not restricting our attention. We went even 20 kilometers away from the location of the meteor path in both directions. So we tried to move away from the meteor path as well. And the map that we made was based on that.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so the next claim he makes here, my screen's going crazy here with a million different subscreens here. The next point that he makes is, whoops, let me close that. Okay. Getting some reports that people can't see it out there. Put a thumbs up if you're able to see this conversation on YouTube, because claims that people aren't able to see it. So leave a thumbs up, and leave a thumbs up anyway, and please do subscribe to the channel. As I said, I'm going to have another conversation with Avi, based on Avi's work, tomorrow for the channel, and that will be a deep dive into the physics of inflation. So Avi does it all. It's not only interstellar meteorites. By the way, you went to great lengths, millions of dollars, and tens of people to get your meteorite sample. I can give a meteorite sample to any of my guests who happen to win it, or my audience members who happen to subscribe at briankeating.com. So please do that. Okay, next one. The specific iron ratios are a smoking gun for the spherules originating in our solar system. The fact that all these samples lie within less than 1%, it's a weird symbol there, by the way, of the terrestrial fractionation line, including Belau spherules they measured, indicates a greater than 4.9 probability that all the spherules, including Belau, are from our solar system. What do you say to that?
This is an important issue. We had so the preprint that they're referring to just considered 10% of the spherules. We just posted the preliminary results. Now we're going through the 90%, the remaining 90%. So the report about the iron isotope ratio was really a very preliminary report in one of the spherules. And it's true that in principle, if you have different stars exploding in different locations in the Milky Way galaxy, you will end up with different isotope ratio for iron, because different isotopes of iron originate from different processes, like type 1a supernovae or AGB, asymptotic giant branch stars. And we expect variations if this object came from far away. And So it's still, what I would say on that is that what was reported in the preprint is very early, preliminary analysis of one of the spherules, and we are now engaged in the full analysis. So we will report whatever we find. When my colleague Stein Jacobson comes back to me with results, we just report them. And here again, I should mention, Desch is very proud of claiming that he was pushing against our paper. And in one of the arguments, someone looked back at our map and said, oh, actually, the map does not represent exactly the color bar next to it. And maybe they tweaked the colors. And that map was produced by my postdoc, Laura Domini. And I went to her and she said, well, it would have been so much more work for me to actually tweak the colors. That critic actually magnified the map and tried to look for a different color. She said that would be so much. I just used an off-the-shelf program to plot this map. And so it just shows you the level of negativity that I've never heard. I had more than 1,000 scientific papers. I've never heard someone being motivated to use a magnifying glass, look at a plot and say, oh, you were fudging this because the color scheme does not. And, it's not me. It's a postdoc that came to my group from Stanford, extremely talented, brilliant. She was using the best tools that exist for plotting. And this person blames us. So I'm just saying there is a lot of negativity that you don't find in the context of other studies. And they're putting the bar so
Avi, of
high that
course.
you
But
could
as we say, in Yiddish, the higher you fly, the easier you are to shoot at. And I think the next one, Avi, I think this is an own goal, Professor Desch and Jackson. So you claim, and I'm saying you, Professor Desch, they claim that all of these have to be true. Okay, so I'm showing it on the line. To claim an interstellar origin for the spherules they collected, all the links in the chain of logic above would have to withstand scrutiny. And he says none of them do. Okay, but now this claim is that one of the spherules is a compound spherule. 3 spherules stuck together while molten. That's your claim, Avi, with your team. And you present a back of the envelope calculation that is consistent with the formation of fireball. Just speaking logically, Professor Desch, this is a total logical fallacy, an own goal. The triple spherules, even if the triple spherules are not, it doesn't mean that the entire claim is wrong. I don't know how he could make that assumption. It's like saying, if you don't have a Bernie Sanders sticker on your car, you can't claim that you're a Bernie Sanders supporter. If this is true or false, it doesn't either refute or neglect the base hypothesis. Correct. So in other words, even if, let's say he's right here on his point number 6, he says the triple spherule S21 almost certainly did not form in a fireball event. Let's say he's right. Okay, which you obviously don't think he's right, but let's say he was right. In that case, that spherule is not a compound spherule. Does that mean that the other ones are not interstellar in origin? I mean, isn't that a logical fallacy, Avi?
I completely agree. And this one was the biggest spherule that we analyzed in that preprint, and 1.3 millimeters in size. And we looked at it first, and it showed this Belau sphere composition. And then we found it in other spherules that do not look like it. So we're talking about a class of spherules that has a composition. By the way, it's really analysis that requires a huge amount of effort to get to those measurements. If you just look at the scientific literature on spherules, you would see that nobody analyzed so many spherules at the level that we do. We have actually 750 of them. It's a factor of 10 more than the number of spherules in a typical paper on meteor sites, and we go a factor of 10 more. We brought them from the bottom of the Pacific Ocean. It's a huge effort, and just ridiculing it and bullying people who engage in that, after such a heroic effort, I think what I would say to that is, people who try to terrorize practicing scientists will not get their way. We will continue the scientific work, irrespective of how many emails Steve Desch sends to members of my team, because they know the truth. They know what we are doing, and they know the level of scientific integrity that we're investing in this.
Yeah. The next one, he says, despite your assertions, the Belau patterns have been seen before. and cosmic spherules of solar system origin from the Indian Ocean. Again, would this, if true, you always have to ask yourself this question as a scientist, if this is true, would this invalidate the base hypothesis, your hypothesis, the prior hypothesis, that these are extraterrestrial in origin? So he's admitting that they could be, that these things have been seen before, but only in our solar system. That doesn't invalidate that they could originate from other objects in the solar system. And they're not even dissimilar to anthropogenic coal ash. I assume he covers that in more depth in the paper. I'm not sure why that's relevant, except to
Well,
say
I
that,
can tell you. So the coal
yeah,
ash thing, I can tell you, the coal ash claim was made by someone who wrote a research note, which is basically an unrefereed two-pager, saying, "Oh, I found a paper in the literature where if I look at three elements, they seem to roughly match the element abundances that were in the Belau spherules." That's the claim, based on three elements, comparing them sort of qualitatively, and that's it. It has some tick marks, and it's a research note that is a couple of pages long, not refereed. And then Steve Desch hangs his hat on that. And to that I say, you should be smart in fighting the right battles. That's because if you were to be very aggressive on a wrong statement, it just shows you your vulnerability. It exposes your weakness, which is basically to look for anything negative to say. And on this, we compared 60 elements, and I have it. We didn't post it yet because it will be part of the next paper, but we clearly see that it's not coal ash. He doesn't have access to the materials, and he makes this very strong statement, went out to the press. There were a number of reporters who mentioned it. The one thing that reporters do not realize is that in science, it's not it's not like politics where, someone says something, therefore I should present both opinions. It's not like
right.
that, because if one side invested months of work to do the hard scientific work, and the other side was sitting on his chair and was just expressing an opinion and saying, maybe it's coal ash. It's not a matter of giving equally opportunity to both sides, right? You need to put some weight on
No,
the amount of effort.
right.
And those people that have access to the materials, obviously, they can examine the materials. We have the data. That's the basic point, that science is driven by data, not by opinion. And as much as Steve Desch, does not like the fact that we are doing science, we will continue to do the science.
Of course, and I view you as an irrepressible force of nature. The last one has some, kind of ring of authenticity to me as a question. I want to ask you, because I'm not an expert, but now going back to my meteorite, which again can be yours if you if you win the giveaway that I have in my lesson. I'll send you one for free. I keep promising you, Avi. But here's a meteorite here that I collected the hard way. I went to Amazon and bought. No, I get them from a special dealer. I get them from a special dealer. They're prime. They're prime. But this particular sample, is the fragment of the Campo de Cielo event, the explosion of a bolide about 7,000 years ago in Argentina, found about in the 1500s. The outside of this, kind of has these nodules. Some of it has thumbprints on bigger sections of it. But I imagine if I cut it open, if I fragmented it, they would look different inside, in that the exterior, this part of it, was exposed to the harsh interstellar weather of cosmic rays, and that induces what's called spallation. I want you to explain spallation in a minute. But wouldn't the skin depth to spallation preclude the interior of this meteorite or the bolide that you saw? Wouldn't that make it harder for cosmic rays to spallate and then make the Belau material? Or am I getting this wrong? I think of it in terms of skin depth and penetration of cosmic rays.
Let me start from clarification. The Belau composition originated from the source, not from the travel through interstellar space. Now, the spallation that you are talking about...
Sorry, he's wrong then. He says that the abundance in these spherules, so he claims that you claim the high abundance was produced by spallation of atoms in meteoroids by cosmic gamma rays, is indicative of cosmic gamma ray irradiation during its passage to interstellar space. So he's wrong. You don't assert
that. And by the way, I mentioned to you this paper that I wrote where I explain it in terms of a differentiated planet where a molten lava or magma ocean, which he actually mentioned in the previous point, that was responsible for the separation of elements and maintaining those Belau compositions in the crust that was then ejected through the disruption of the planet. So all of that argues that it's at the source. The Belau composition is from the source. It has nothing to do with the travel through interstellar space. And with respect to spallation, this is just a simple process where you have energetic particles, for example, cosmic rays, protons, that are moving at a speed very close to the speed of light, and they collide with the nucleus and breaking it up. And in fact, there are some elements like beryllium, which are enhanced as a result of energetic particles colliding with the material, and breaking it up, and a heavier nucleus. And we do see enhancement of beryllium, but that could happen at the source. It doesn't have to be from spallation.
So the other context that he puts into it, would any of it survive entry? He does a back of the envelope calculation and says it was about the mass of half a giraffe. Okay, that's an interesting mass measurement, 450 kilograms, and therefore it's only 48 centimeter sphere in diameter equivalent. Right. Now, if it's going at 140 times the speed of sound, he says, in Jackson, the meteoroid would have completely vaporized in the atmosphere.
Well, that's
so how do you react to that claim?
Yeah, that's the calculation we did with the summer intern, Emory Tillinghast, and you can look at that paper, and we did the calculation. So indeed, as I said, most of it is vaporized, but we went through, the equations that describe what's left from that, and that would depend on the material strength. So if you assume a rock, you get one answer, and we derived that in the paper. If you assume that it's made of stainless steel, the way that the Voyager spacecraft was, or any some artificial alloy that is related to an alien spacecraft, then the answer would be different. So we know that this object, by the way, exploded in the lower atmosphere and must have had a very high material strength to survive down to there, and it was tougher than iron meteorites. So actually, with a student that approached me at a conference in Stanford 2 weeks ago, that was a student of material science, that he's doing a PhD in material science, and he was inspired by my talk about the expedition. So he came to me and said, how can I help? And I said, well, you have a computer code to calculate material strength given a composition of material, and so let's simulate what this meteor was made of, and see if indeed it was of very high material strength. So we're doing this, and to that I say again that when you deal with innovation in science, it inspires young people. They come to me and want to work with me. Two of my postdocs, Laura Dumini and Richard Cloet, they told me that when I called them to offer them the postdoctoral fellowship, that was the thing that they hoped for their entire career before that, because they had no opportunity to work on these subjects. So these people, these young scholars, are inspired by innovation. But then comes an arrogant senior person and tries to intimidate them, and that's what I find inappropriate.
Good. Okay, Avi, I know you've only got about 10 minutes before your next appointment. So we have a couple of questions and from the audience, and we'll take some. Some are about academia. We can take some of those if you like. Some are about Israel. We can take some of those if you like. So anything. The first thing I want to get your reaction to is there have been some reactions online about the implausibility of statements made by David Grush and others that there's crashed alien spacecraft and so forth, and the argument seems to go along these lines, and I want to get your reaction logically to them. One of them is that these aliens are so sophisticated they can make a spacecraft that can travel interstellar distances, but then they crash on Earth. I want to point out, I'm a pilot. I fly little tiny Cessnas around. Okay, I'm not like my past guest. When I had on Hazard Lee, or I had on Ryan Graves, and these are great heroes. These are military fighter pilots of the highest order. I'm nothing like that. But I'll point out that if you look at the FAA's accident database, where do you think the most outlying probability is for a crash of a commercial piloted plane, not an amateur like me, a commercially trained pilot, somebody flying in which of the phases of flight? Takeoff, cruise flight, or landing? Which are the most likely to cause an accident? What would you say, Avi?
Probably landing.
Landing. It's like 6 to 8 times more perilous. In other words, these accidents tend to occur during the landing phase. So I like to point that out to people that snicker and sneer, including people like Brian Greene, who I had on last week on the podcast, who I did a wonderful interview with him in person at Columbia right before there was a huge protest against Israel. But at any rate, so I just like to point that out. Even human pilots crash more during landing, and military pilots as well. So anyway, I think that's kind of a ridiculous argument.
Well, it
But I
also
want to
depends.
ask.
It depends how many things are flying. If there are lots of them, then the chance, even a small chance, would lead to some evidence over decades of time. And it's all about evidence. People try to have an opinion. That's a very easy thing. The difficult part is collecting the evidence. If the government has, so do you want my opinion on Grush? Actually,
Yeah, of
I
course.
wrote last night when I returned at 10 p.m. from Washington, D.C., I wrote an essay with the title, and you can find it on medium.com, with the title of New Physics or Misinformation. That is the dilemma that we face when listening to the testimony of Grush in front of the House of Representatives. Now, it's completely plausible that he is sincere, that he just reports what he heard from 40 people who told him about things that happen, and then he exaggerated the significance of those and misinterpreted some, and as a result, he didn't witness it himself, he didn't see the materials, yet he claimed that there is material in biologics of in crash sites. And as a scientist, I must say that this is not convincing. I need to see the evidence. If the government has this, I really want to know about it, to see it. That's part of the Schumer amendment, the UAP Disclosure Act, if there is something to it. But there is another possibility, that there is a campaign of misinformation, that some people want the public to believe in things that are not real. And we know that in politics, you could have an agenda of that nature just to mislead the adversarial countries, or to make the public distrust anything they hear, so that if there are programs to develop new technologies that the US government is funding through the military industrial complex, that it will be lost in the noise. If someone sees something, they will not talk about it because of the stigma associated with very advanced technologies, perhaps coming extraterrestrially. So that could be in the background. Now, this Schumer amendment is being resisted by some people in Congress. And the fundamental question is whether this resistance is superficial. They just do it for political reasons. Even though it was proposed by the Senate Majority Leader, Chuck Schumer, it was bipartisan. There was support for it in the Senate. But it's also possible that there are people who know what the government has. They deal with highly classified information, and they know that there is nothing to substantiate Grush's claims. So they go to the chairs of those subcommittees and tell them, look, this would endanger national security if there will be a committee that will oversee what the government does and ask for all the information. Some of it may leak to our adversaries, and this is not good for the country. So then there would be opposition, but you will not really understand why there is this opposition. Of course, there are people who claim there is a conspiracy, the government is trying to hide. I tend to believe the government is incompetent to hide something of that nature for so long, especially if it involves biological materials.
Yeah, it would be a conspiracy, that would dwarf the Kennedy assassination conspiracy.
Right.
Okay, I have to ask you this question. It's from a listener on YouTube, Hervig the Wild. So he's saying, basically, we don't even know if what he grabbed off the bottom of the sea is anything to do with a bolide, yet you, Avi, are jumping to alien technology. Is that what you're saying? Is this alien
No, I'm
technology,
saying
or are you claiming it is?
And I'm not claiming it. I'm saying it's a possibility. Now, let me explain where I'm coming from. Just like you, Brian, I worked early on cosmology, where, for example, we don't know what the dark matter is. That's the 83% of the matter in the universe. We have never witnessed it in the solar system. So in that culture that I worked on for decades, people were proposing different types of dark matter. It could be primordial black holes. It could be a very light particle like the axion. It could be massive particles like weakly interacting massive particles. And it could be all kinds of things. And when you were to propose observational signatures of a hypothesis, everyone would cheer because it allows experimentalists to pursue and rule out possibilities. So it's an integral part of doing science to propose possibilities so that we can rule them out and figure out the truth eventually, because one of them might be true. So the way I approach this subject is, if I see an object, a meteor, that was moving faster than 95% of the stars, that had material strength, tougher than iron meteorites, I say we should leave on the table the possibility that it is a Voyager-like meteor. If Voyager were to collide with a planet like the Earth, it would burn up in the atmosphere of that planet as a very tough object, because it's made of an artificial alloy, and it would move faster than usual because it was propelled by a chemical rocket. So that's all. I'm saying let's leave it on the table. And then the public gets extremely excited. And then some reporters report about it as if I'm saying that. And then my colleagues are arguing that I'm saying that. But I never said that. Listen to my podcast interviews, see what I write on medium.com, and you will never see that as me arguing that it must be an alien spacecraft. I'm just saying this is a possibility we should leave on the table. Just like in the case of dark matter, you would never dismiss weakly interacting massive particles as a possibility because you don't know the answer.
Okay, we have one question from friend of the show, Ross at Event Horizon. He wants to know, who were you meeting with yesterday in Washington, D.C.?
Oh, there were a number of people. Some of them were in Congress, some of them were in the Senate. What I should say, and some of them were in the Department of Defense. What I should say is, I was amazed. Like, at least two of these meetings, these are high-level officials. Okay, and they would come to me and say, I follow what you do, and I really admire your work, and I never imagined that I will meet with you. Now, I could never imagine that they would say that, because these are people, within, at high level, within the US government, that apparently they do appreciate the innovation that I'm pursuing. And I never take it for granted, because, overall, I'm just driven by curiosity. That's all that motivates me. I'm just a curious farm boy trying to figure out the world, given the opportunity to be a scientist so that, I can answer questions myself. I don't need to listen to Grush telling me what lies outside the solar system. Really, I mean, Grush, when he expressed himself as if what he's talking about is a result of extra dimensions or the holographic principle, this didn't sound I know these ideas in the context of string theory. We have no experimental clue to support them. They're completely speculative, unrelated to any phenomena at low energies, low space-time curvature that we have near Earth. So that sounded like far-fetched to me. But I just believe that evidence will guide us to the answer, and we should collect it rather than say it's an extraordinary claim, and therefore, since there is no evidence, we should just shy away from it, which is pretty much what all the critics are saying. I say, we need to seek the evidence. So extraordinary evidence requires extraordinary effort. It's a lot of hard work, and that should be celebrated. The hard work of science, where we don't know the answer in advance, we don't have an opinion, we just work on collecting the evidence. So what I feel is that instead of that being celebrated within academia, the hard work, I see people like Desch ridiculing it, pushing back. However, within government, people are supportive, I always receive positive feedback. Within the public, people are extremely supportive. So once again, we come back to where we started. Something is wrong in academia.
Yeah, indeed we do. And I guess the question I have for you is, where do you go from here in both the search for these materials' origins first and foremost, and then where do you go in academia? Is there a home? Is there a place for ideas that can survive the kind of onslaught that we've witnessed in the last 2 months? It's just been absolutely shocking. I mean, some people are saying, "Oh, the donors just have to," and I was asked by people, "Well, what if the Jewish donors just stop donating?" I found that very insulting. It's
Right.
a very offensive trope that Jews are mainly interested in how their money is used, and if we don't have a happy state of affairs, then the Jewish bankers and the elders of Zion will just cancel. No. That's
Well,
not what's effective.
let me explain one
Go ahead.
very simple fact. I was at Harvard University for 30 years, okay? 30 years, Claudine Gay came to Harvard University 8 years ago. Okay, she doesn't own Harvard University, even though she's the president. I feel that this is my home, and if someone comes to my home and violates my principles, I don't leave home because of that. I will try to change the intellectual climate we live in for the better. Okay, that's my answer. But with respect to the future of the meteor research, we are planning an expedition. It will probably cost at least twice or three times the previous cost, probably around $4 to $5 million, because we need a much more sophisticated equipment to find bigger fragments of the object. And once we find them, we can easily tell the difference between a rock and an artificial technological gadget, because a gadget could have buttons on it. And I actually asked students in my class whether if we find a gadget, whether we should press any button on it. And half of them said, please don't, because it will affect all of us. Half of them said, yes, please do, because it might be ChatGPT 100. And then one student asked me, what would you do, Professor Loeb? And I said, I will bring it to a laboratory and examine it. No worries. And actually, after we examine it, I promised Paula Antonelli, in the spirit of Love the Aliens, to put it on exhibit at the Museum of Modern Art, because for us, it will be modern art to just witness that.
Very good, Avi. Well, this has been a treat. I know you have to go. I'm going to stick around for a few minutes, talk to the audience a little bit more, answer a couple more questions. But I really salute you for your courage and also just the intellectual striving for truth that I always associate with you. And you've got millions of fans around the world. You're always welcome here on the podcast. We're overdue for a dinner together, for a lunch, for whatever we can arrange. Hopefully on the East Coast or the West Coast. Maybe you'll come out here in the winter and you'll get away from it all in southern.
Thank you so much. And if I could just mention, my mantra is maintain your childhood curiosity and never pretend to be the adult in the room. That's the first thing that I advise young people. But the second is, let's work together rather than hate each other. That it's the source of all the problems we discussed, starting from the Middle East, going through what happens on campuses, and ending up with scientific discourse. Let's just be positive rather than negative, and this will solve all of these problems.
Yes, I agree. Science is our greatest hope, or possibly our greatest source of probability for demise. I hope we'll choose the wise path. Avi Loeb, we have your website, Avi-Loeb, Loeb, .medium.com. It's on the screen. And Avi, thank you so much. Stay safe over there. I worry about your safety on campus, to be honest with you.
No worries. My skin is now made of titanium after I survived the attacks by Desch.
Not Belau? It should be made of Belau. You should have a Belau suit.
Yeah. No.
All right. Litrot. Shalom, Avi. Thank you. Well, that was super fun for me. I just want to express my gratitude to all of you up there. This might be our last live stream, but we have a lot of cool last live stream of 2023. Of course, we have many, many cool things coming your way in 2024. But even before 2024, we've got phenomenal interviews. I conducted an interview, with those of you who think I only talk to Jews or I have some propensity for that. That's absolutely not true. I actually spoke to perhaps the world's foremost expert on happiness, Muslim friend of mine, Mo Gadot, very famous thinker, researcher at Google X, made millions, maybe $1 billion, I don't know. We talked to him a couple of weeks ago, and that interview's will break your heart. It's one of the most moving interviews. You may know he lost his son, age about 17, in Boston, not far from where Avi just joined us from, during a routine surgery. And he and I talked about happiness in the time of post-October 7th, with a particular emphasis on what could be done to alleviate the suffering of Palestinians and Jews. And as I said, he's a Muslim and I'm a Jew. And we had one of the best conversations that I ever had on this channel. Now, it's not a science conversation per se, although we talk a lot. Half the conversation's about artificial intelligence. And I think you'll very much enjoy that and the prospects for potential AI convergence in a negative light, which would lead to a singularity, not of the black hole kind. We talk about that based on his second book, Scary Smart. But his first book is also a big topic of conversation that's called Solve for Happy. And not to be outdone, I talked to Professor Gad Saad in Concordia University in Canada about his book, The Sad Truth on Happiness. He's a Jew. He's not a practicing Jew, but he is a Jewish person. And we also talked about regaining and how do you deal with daily life as a scientist, as a parent. I think you'll really enjoy those interviews. We have very firm plans to interview Kip Thorne, the winner of the 2017 Nobel Prize, co-recipient, the only Nobel Prize winner I haven't had on the podcast that won the Nobel Prize in Physics in 2017 from the LIGO experiment. He'll be on towards the end of the month. And then I have a tentative, it's very tentative, but I've been invited on Andrew Huberman's podcast, and I will certainly keep you posted on that, because I intend to flip the script on my buddy Andy, as we used to call him, but now we call him Andrew, the most famous science podcaster on the planet, a lovely soul. And I plan to flip the script, and don't tell him, but I'm going to ask him some questions, because he's a fascinating and extremely important individual, culturally, scientifically, with the research that he's doing. So send me questions that you'd like me to ask of him when and if that does materialize. He's got an incredibly packed 2024 himself, with live tours in Australia and America. But I'm very much looking forward to that. It's been an incredible year for me personally. Research-wise, we're coming up on some major announcements in my research field. Stay tuned for those, and also in personally and professionally, when it comes to the podcast, it's become a huge source of inspiration, of relief and release, and has allowed me to maintain my sanity in the last 2 months, especially with all the campus craziness and things we've been dealing with that we talked about early. I thought it was great that Avi was so willing to talk and criticize his president there at Harvard. And I shouldn't say that any place else is different. Even my current institution has its flaws and challenges. I don't know. I don't know how academia can recover in its current phase when we're seemingly just so unwilling. And I fear there's going to be sort of this litmus test. Every single president's going to be asked, do you condemn genocide and so forth? And I think that would be kind of a negative outcome for academia. I think academia has limited potential for two reasons. One, to survive in the future, and it should take advantage of them. One, I think artificial intelligence, personalized tutors, they're just around the corner. You could basically, for $20 a month, imagine uploading all your emails, all your course records, all the transcripts, everything you've ever done in your life to an intelligent agent that can then not only assess your weaknesses, but teach you anything you want. And imagine if it's animated, an avatar with having, Avi Loeb, right there, and not having to pay, $72,000 a year for this experience. And something like 60% of people don't graduate in 4 years. So you're talking, maybe even $300,000+. And many of those people don't ever graduate. And that's a huge drain economically, personally. Imagine you're a person, you went to college for 4 years, you didn't graduate, but you still have the $300,000 in loans that, it's so nice. The government does not allow you to discharge those loans in bankruptcy. The only type of loan that my colleagues have devised to extract resources from you, the tax-paying public, and not allow you to discharge them. We allow you to do that for, MBNA or some other credit card. But anyway, academia could be threatened. Imagine sitting down with Albert Einstein and asking him, well, Albert, I'd rather learn about the Lorentz transformation, special relativity from you than from some professor that I have to pay, $7,000 a course. And half my students don't show up to any given lecture. So these are threats. Now, the other threat is that it could be intolerant for certain sets of people. And although I've been asked about donations and will I give donations and will I encourage people to give donations? Again, I find that mildly offensive, slightly anti-Semitic, and to be honest with you, that's the most important thing to me is how my money is used, or how I advise my rich brother-in-law, to give money. No, that's not the case. it's actually more important to vote with your feet, not your pocketbook in this situation. And I wonder, if you got accepted at Harvard, if you got accepted at Harvard, be honest out there, and you're looking forward to, you're a high school senior, and go back to those days, you're accepted to Harvard. And let's say you've seen what happened on campus and what Avi has described. Would you really turn it down? Be honest. If you would turn it down, leave a thumbs down right now. There's 13 thumbs downs in this video. And then immediately change it to a thumbs up. But that's the only way I can really count, because I know you all love this video so much. And it'll be taken down. I'm going to take down this video later on. So, this is your chance to vote for it. I will hopefully have some way to share the content at a later date. But I will take it down, and then we'll see how we can edit it offline in the near future. But let's say, would you turn down an offer from Harvard? Be honest. I don't know many people that would. But imagine if literally millions of high school seniors say, I'm not doing this. I'm either going to go to the military, I'm going to go travel for a year. For the same amount of money, you could hire a private tutor to accompany your child around the world, taking lessons from great tutors in all the capitals of the world and get experience. And yes, go to these places that otherwise you just read about and learn whatever. You can learn physics just as well from me as you can from a professor in England, Italy, in Thailand. And but see the world. How much broader would your horizons be? Do some service. Anyway, these are ideas that I think universities are ignoring at their peril. And I'm very worried about that. Because I think, the days may be numbered for my profession, which was the only thing I ever wanted to do. I've had real jobs. I've done actual manual labor in my life. I've worked in restaurants. I've been a mover in a moving company. I've done a lot of, and this is the only job I wanted to do, and I never want to stop doing it. But I could see a time when the campus becomes intolerable, and just the association with other faculty, with students that I teach, would be something I wouldn't want to associate with, and with presidents of the university or chancellors in the case of the UC system. So it's an opportunity. It's also a crisis. And those words are allegedly, a synonym in the Chinese pictogram that represents the word crisis. So I would like to know how you have changed your ideas. So please leave a comment in the comment section when the video does go up about your thoughts about it. But again, this podcast and the opportunity to kind of wax and wane in terms of the great speakers and content that I get on this channel is just a real thrill. I never take it for granted. It's all free. Yeah, you have to endure some YouTube ads. I'm sorry about that, but that's a fact of life. But besides that, it's all give away for free. And also for free, if you have a .edu email address, like my beloved students all do, please, and faculty do, please go to this link down below, briankeating.com, or take a QR code snapshot of this sucker over here. And that will whisk you away to my mailing list, where I send out cool information about my guests and thoughts and musings and ruminations and giveaways and so forth. And one of the things I do give away every month are these meteorites. This is a real meteorite, 4 billion year old fragment of the solar system, of our solar system, not wherever Avi's Bilal came from. Who knows? And let me know if you'd like to really get a kind of rebuttal or presentation from Steve Desch. I didn't want to have, Avi and Steve go at it, live. I don't think that would be very productive, but I do wonder if you think it would be a good idea to have Steve on and just interview him or his colleague Jackson. I think that could be a very, very illuminating discussion, because that's how science is actually done. Not these sniping. I was disappointed to hear that Desch, indeed, if that's true, which I have no reason to doubt Avi, that he was writing to junior colleagues. I mean, that's just not something you do. But maybe there's some explanation, or maybe some misinterpretation and so forth. Avi is not shy, as you know, of kind of being a staunch defender of his scientific ideas, and he's had millions of them. So I really like to get your feedback, and also recommendations for upcoming guests. As I said, we've got incredible guests coming on, Nobel Prize winners. I'll be announcing a new book in 2024. Stay tuned for that. And we will hopefully be a part of the broader project of scientific education. And also, scientists are human, so I can't ignore the situation that affects millions of people around the world directly, and much worse than I'm being affected by it. Although I do have family members that are directly affected, and even one of my colleagues in Tel Aviv, his cousin is currently a hostage in Gaza. Held, they don't know if he's alive or dead, and actually his son was also taken hostage. So what is that? I'm allegedly pretty smart, but I can't. I think it's a second cousin, or maybe it's a first cousin once removed. Please put that in the chat right now. What is the son of somebody's cousin, first cousin? Are they a second cousin or a first cousin once? Anyway, not important. But what is important is that this cousin of my close colleague and collaborator is a hostage. So it's very difficult for me to be completely impartial. Of course, I sympathize with the sympathy sympathy for the Palestinian people. I think that is, and I came away, as I wrote in my newsletter, from my trip to Israel in September. I was there for the high holidays, and I came away with actually a hope for peace and a two-state solution for the very first time in all my visits there and the months of time I've spent there, and the people that I know and love that live there. And I realize now that what I was exposed to is the is how I was really kind of exposed to Palestinians from the West Bank primarily, and as well as Bedouins and people of the Bedouin community, Muslims, all, and it was really a hopeful, inspiring situation for me. But now I feel like, because of the actions of October 7th, those hopes are misplaced. And so I'd love to be proven wrong about that, but I can't ignore it. And so I appreciate this chance to kind of elaborate along with Avi on what we've experienced on campuses or experiencing personally. Obviously, Avi, as an Israeli, citizen by birth, dual citizen, he has it much more acutely than I do. But he was very liberal, in his political orientation before this. You write to him, you get back, his pronouns and so forth. He's very progressive Jew, as many are, and I think he was thoroughly, disabused of the notion that there could be a real near-term seeking of peace. So I hope I'm wrong. I hope that there can be such a solution. I hope that campuses can regain the glory that they once had. And now I am in serious doubt. And it's personally depressing to witness that. I used to view the university as a sanctuary for scholarship. And when you hear calls for banning of specific people and not allocating any space for them on campus, accusations that chancellors are complicit in genocide and that simultaneously one country on earth should be eliminated, as a Jewish state, and not even comfortable to admit that in front of Congress, that President Gay was saying she was in favor of a Jewish state, Israel being a Jewish state, or there existing a Jewish state. So these are very disappointing, dark times. When even the president of my alma mater, Brown University, she could not say, that she wanted Brown to remain a place where you could be comfortable wearing a hijab, a keffiyeh, or a yarmulke, and instead only said a hijab or a keffiyeh. I mean, that's just high cowardice, and I'm quite ashamed of that. She's the most safe person on that campus. And I don't know why it's so difficult to say such things. I don't think it is a fair assessment of the reasonability of our Palestinian colleagues and students and friends, that they can't somehow take it when a president would say she believes that Israelis have a right to their own country, as much as Palestinians do as well. So it's been a dark time. But the season of light is upon us. Happy Hanukkah to all those who celebrate. Coming up tomorrow night, it's a celebration of some very dark forces 2,000 years ago that attempted to suppress and eliminate and truly do an ethnic cleansing on Jewish people. And it's become, more commercialized holiday like Christmas, because it always comes in December. But without that, we might not have, without that Maccabean rebellion, we might not have monotheism for whatever you may say, even if you're an atheist, the difference between monotheistic societies, polytheistic societies, of which we may be in one. When we have worship of things like the Ivy League degrees or Nobel Prizes or Maimon money, these are not so far removed from the gods of Zeus and Jove and whatever else, Ceres, as I alluded to earlier. So anyway, I appreciate you guys. I really want to keep delivering more and more value, and I know that you're going to love the interviews I have coming up, as I said, with Mo Gadot, Gad Sad, Kip Thorne, Professor Robert Sapolsky of Stanford University, who's written a book that asserts we have no free will. Interested in getting feedback from you. So you can always ask me questions. I take them live, as you saw. I also take them, you can submit them, and I'll post on YouTube in the community tab. So please do hit the notification bell, because that's, I think, the only way you get notified that I'm having on, I'm going to be talking to Andrew Huberman. So if you have any questions for him, that's where I'm going to advertise it, there and on Twitter at Dr. Brian Keating, at symbol Dr. Brian Keating. Instagram as well. We're seeing a nice explosion of views since my appearance on Joe Rogan this year. And that's been a wonderfully gratifying year. I can't really say that I could wish for more next year. I've kind of hit, maybe I should retire. I've kind of hit the peak experiences of podcasting, although I obviously want to deliver more and more of what you crave, which I think is interesting analysis and facts about our universe. And I'll do my best to do that. So anyway, thank you all. Appreciate you. Maybe do one more conversation with Eric Weinstein this year. We have tentative plans to meet up in a couple weeks, and who knows? He's been in a dark place. I know I have as well. I hope to get him on maybe in person for a final stream of the year. So stay tuned for that, and let me know, if anything, what you want me to ask these great, wonderful individuals that come on the podcast. So for now, it's your humble host, Brian Keating, signing off. Don't forget briankeating.com, or snap a picture of the QR code on the screen, and you will be entered into win a meteorite, unless you have a .edu email address, in which case you will win a meteorite. So don't miss on that. I don't know if it'll arrive. It won't arrive before Hanukkah. I can promise you that, but it'll arrive. Don't worry. Gravity got it here. Interstellar travels notwithstanding, and the U.S. Postal Service will get it back to you guys. Brian Keating, sending you my love throughout the cosmos. Spread the word, share the channel with your friends and family, share this interview while you can, because I'm going to take it down in just a bit and process it. Signing off. Close the pod bay doors. You guys like my new neon sign over here? Open the pod bay doors. I don't know if you can see the full thing. There it is. Open the pod bay doors into the impossible. Brian Keating, signing off. Enjoy. Happy holidays, everybody.